Welcome back. Let's read a bit aircraft. That's a long time ago. I just made a lot of video on my language tennis about my debt video. So I don't like to talk about money more today. I still have many hundreds of aircraft I like to read about. So it'll be a long hot day. It will be 30 degrees in a few hours. No, I still have this 400. I got 36 pages with aircraft. That's 700. I still have all this open on this old computer. I cannot keep do this like forever. I still have like 300 web pages open. All this many. I have it a crazy number. So let's read this. Then I will make a video on my language tennis. After this, I need half a minute to lay down a bit.
Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Superfortress and B-29 redirect here. For the derived post-war bomber, see Boeing B-50 Superfortress. For other uses, see B-29, disambiguation. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress is an American four-engined propeller-driven heavy bomber, designed by Boeing and flown primarily by the United States during World War II and the Korean War. Named in allusion to its predecessor, the B-17 Flying Fortress, the Superfortress was designed for high-altitude strategic bombing, but also excelled in low-altitude night incendiary bombing, and in dropping naval mines to blockade Japan. B-29s dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only aircraft ever to drop nuclear weapons in combat. One of the largest aircraft of World War II, the B-29 was designed with state-of-the-art technology, which included a pressurized cabin, dual-wheel tricycle landing gear, and an analog computer-controlled fire control system that allowed one gunner and a fire control officer to direct 4 remote machine gun turrets. The $3 billion cost of design and production, equivalent to $51 billion in 2022, far exceeding the $1.9 billion cost of the Manhattan Project, made the B-29 program the most expensive of the war. The B-29 remained in service in various roles throughout the 1950s, being retired in the early 1960s after 3,970 had been built. A few were also used as flying television transmitters by the Stratovision Company. The Royal Air Force flew the B-29 with the service name Washington from 1950 to 1954 when the jet-powered Canberra entered service. The B-29 was the progenitor of a series of Boeing-built bombers, transports, tankers, reconnaissance aircraft, and trainers. For example, the re-engined B-50 Superfortress Lucky Lady II became the first aircraft to fly around the world non-stop, during a 94-hour flight in 1949. The Boeing C-97 straight-off-freighter airlifter, which was first flown in 1944, was followed in 1947 by its commercial airliner variant, the Boeing Model 377 Stratocruiser. This bomber-to-airliner derivation was similar to the B-17 /Model 307 evolution. In 1948, Boeing introduced the KB-29 tanker, followed in 1950 by the Model 377 derivative KC-97. A line of outsized cargo variants of the Stratocruiser is the Guppy/Mini Guppy/Super Guppy, which remain in service with NASA and other operators. The Soviet Union produced 847 Tupolev Tu-4S, an unlicensed reverse-engineered copy of the B-29. 20 B-29s remain as static displays, but only two, Fifi and Doc, still fly. Design and Development, edit. Before World War II, the United States Army Air Corps concluded that the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, which would be the Americans' primary strategic bomber during the war, would be inadequate for the Pacific theater, which required a bomber that could carry a larger payload more than 3,000 miles. In response, Boeing began work on pressurized long-range bombers in 1938. Boeing's design study for the Model 334 was a pressurized derivative of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress with no Zulu undercarriage. Although the Air Corps lacked funds to pursue the design, Boeing continued development with its own funds as a private venture. In April 1939, Charles Lindbergh convinced General Henry H. Arnold to produce a new bomber in large numbers to counter the Germans' bomber production. In December 1939, the Air Corps issued a formal specification for a so-called superbomber that could deliver 20,000 pound, 9,100 kilograms, of bombs to a target 2,667 mi, 4,292 kilometers, away, and at a speed of 400 miles per hour, 640 kilometers per hour. Boeing's previous private venture studies formed the starting point for its response to the Air Corps formal specification. Boeing submitted its Model 345 on the 11th of May 1940, in competition with designs from Consolidated Aircraft, the Model 33, which later became the B-32, Lockheed, the Lockheed XB-30, and Douglas, the Douglas XB-31. Douglas and Lockheed soon abandoned work on their projects, but Boeing received an order for two flying prototypes, which were given the designation XB-29, and an airframe for static testing on the 24th of August 1940, with the order being revised to add a third flying aircraft on the 14th of December. Consolidated continued to work on its Model 33, as it was seen by the Air Corps as a backup if there were problems with Boeing's design. Boeing received an initial production order for 14 service test aircraft and 250 production bombers in May 1941, this being increased to 500 aircraft in January 1942. The B-29 featured a fuselage design with circular cross-section for strength. The need for pressurization in the cockpit area also led to the B-29 being one of very few American combat aircraft of World War II to have a stepless cockpit design, without a separate windscreen for the pilots. Manufacturing the B-29 was a complex task that involved 4 main assembly factories. There were 2 Boeing-operated plants at Renton, Washington, Boeing Renton Factory, and one in Wichita, Kansas, now Spirit Aerosystems, a Bell plant at Marietta, Georgia, near Atlanta, Bell Atlanta, and a Martin plant at Bellevue, Nebraska, Martin Omaha or Fute Field. Thousands of subcontractors were also involved in the project. The first prototype made its maiden flight from Boeing Field, Seattle, on the 21st of September 1942. The combined effects of the aircraft's highly advanced design, challenging requirements, immense pressure for production, and hurried development caused setbacks. Unlike the unarmed first prototype, The second was fitted with a Sperry defensive armament system using remote-controlled gun turrets sighted by periscopes and first flew on the 30th of December, 1942, although the flight was terminated due to a serious engine fire. On the 18th of February, 1943, the second prototype, flying out of Boeing Field in Seattle, experienced an engine fire and crashed. The crash killed Boeing test pilot Edmund T. Allen and his 10-man crew, 20 workers at the Fry meat packing plant and a Seattle firefighter. Changes to the production craft came so often and so fast that, in early 1944, B-29s flew from the production lines directly to modification depots for extensive rebuilds to incorporate the latest changes. AAF contracted modification centers and its own air depot system struggled to handle the scope of the requirements. Some facilities lacked hangars capable of housing the giant B-29, requiring outdoor work in freezing weather, further delaying necessary modification. By the end of 1943, although almost 100 aircraft had been delivered, only 15 were airworthy. This prompted an intervention by General Hap Arnold to resolve the problem, with production personnel being sent from the factories to the modification centers to speed availability of sufficient aircraft to equip the first bomb groups in what became known as the Battle of Kansas. This resulted in 150 aircraft being modified in the 5 weeks, between the 10th of March and the 15th of April, 1944. The most common cause of maintenance headaches and catastrophic failures was the engines. Although the Wright R3350 duplex cyclone radial engines later became a trustworthy workhorse in large piston-engined aircraft, early models were beset with dangerous reliability problems. This problem was not fully cured until the aircraft was fitted with the more powerful Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp Major in the B-29D/B-50 program, which arrived too late for World War II. Interim measures included cuffs placed on propeller blades to divert a greater flow of cooling air into the intakes, which had baffles installed to direct a stream of air onto the exhaust valves. Oil flow to the valves was also increased. Asbestos baffles were installed around rubber pushrod fittings to prevent oil loss. Thorough pre-flight inspections were made to detect unseated valves, and mechanics frequently replaced the uppermost 5 cylinders, every 25 hours of engine time, and the entire engines, every 75 hours. Pilots, including the present-day pilots of the Commemorative Air Force's FIFI, one of the last 2 remaining flying B-29s, describe flight after takeoff as being an urgent struggle for airspeed. Generally, flight after takeoff should consist of striving for altitude. Radial engines need airflow to keep them cool, and failure to get up to speed as soon as possible could result in an engine failure and risk of fire. One useful technique was to check the magnetos while already on takeoff roll rather than during a conventional static engine run-up before takeoff. In wartime, the B-29 was capable of flight at altitudes up to 31,850 feet, 9,710 m, at speeds of up to 350 miles per hour, 560 kilometers per hour, 300 km. True airspeed. This was its best defense because Japanese fighters could barely reach that altitude, and few could catch the B-29 even if they did attain that altitude. Defensive gun turret emplacements, edit. The General Electric Central Fire Control System on the B-29 directed 4 remotely controlled turrets armed with 2.50 Browning M2 machine guns each. All weapons were aimed optically, with targeting computed by analog electrical instrumentation. There were 5 interconnected sighting stations located in the nose and tail positions and 3 plexiglass blisters in the central fuselage. 5 General Electric analog computers, one dedicated to each site, increased the weapon's accuracy by compensating for factors such as airspeed, lead, gravity, temperature and humidity. The computers also allowed a single gunner to operate 2 or more turrets, including tail guns, simultaneously. The gunner in the upper position acted as fire control officer, managing the distribution of turrets among the other gunners during combat. The tail position initially had 2.50 Browning machine guns and a single M2 20mm cannon. Later aircraft had the 20mm cannon removed, sometimes replaced by a third machine gun. In early 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay, commander of XXI Bomber Command, the Marianas-based B-29 equipped bombing force, ordered most of the defensive armament and remote-controlled sighting equipment removed from the B-29s under his command. The affected aircraft had the same reduced defensive firepower as the nuclear weapons delivery-intended silver plate B-29 airframes and could carry greater fuel and bomb loads as a result of the change. The lighter defensive armament was made possible by a change in mission from high-altitude, daylight bombing with high-explosive bombs to low-altitude night raids using incendiary bombs. As a consequence of that requirement, Bell Atlanta, BA, produced a series of 311 B-29Bs that had turrets and sighting equipment omitted, except for the tail position, which was fitted with an forward/APG-15 fire control radar. That version could also have an improved APQ-7 Eagle bombing through overcast radar fitted in an airfoil-shaped radome under the fuselage. Most of those aircraft were assigned to the 315th Bomb Wing, Northwest Field, Guam. Pressurization, edit. The crew would enjoy, for the first time in a bomber, full pressurization comfort. This first ever cabin pressure system for an Allied production bomber was developed for the B-29 by Garrett R. Research. Both the forward and rear crew compartments were to be pressurized, but the designers had to decide whether to have bomb bays that were not pressurized or a fully pressurized fuselage that would have to be depressurized prior to opening the bomb bay doors. The solution was to have bomb bays that were not pressurized and a long tunnel joining the forward and rear crew compartments. Crews could use the tunnel if necessary to crawl from one pressurized compartment to the other. Operational history, edit. World War II, edit. See also, air raids on Japan. In September 1941, the United States Army Air Force's plans for war against Germany and Japan proposed basing the B-29 in Egypt for operations against Germany, as British air bases were likely to be overcrowded. Air Force planning throughout 1942 and early 1943 continued to have the B-29 deployed initially against Germany, transferring to the Pacific only after the end of the war in Europe. By the end of 1943, plans had changed, partly due to production delays, and the B-29 was dedicated to the Pacific Theater. A new plan implemented at the direction of President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a promise to China, called Operation Matterhorn, deployed the B-29 units to attack Japan from 4 forward bases in southern China, with 5 main bases in India, and to attack other targets in the region from China and India as needed. The Chengdu region was eventually chosen over the Guilin region to avoid having to raise, equip, and train 50 Chinese divisions to protect the advanced bases from Japanese ground attack. The XX Bomber Command, initially intended to be 2 combat wings of 4 groups each, was reduced to a single wing of 4 groups because of the lack of availability of aircraft, automatically limiting the effectiveness of any attacks from China. This was an extremely costly scheme, as there was no overland connection available between India and China, and all supplies had to be flown over the Himalayas, either by transport aircraft or by B-29s themselves. with some aircraft being stripped of armor and guns and used to deliver fuel. B-29s started to arrive in India in early April 1944. The first B-29 flight to airfields in China, over the Himalayas, or the Hump, took place on the 24th of April 1944. The first B-29 combat mission was flown on the 5th of June 1944, with 77 out of 98 B-29s launched from India bombing the railroad shops in Bangkok and elsewhere in Thailand. 5 B-29s were lost during the mission, none to hostile fire. Forward base in China, edit. On the 5th of June 1944, B-29s raided Bangkok, in what is reported as a test before being deployed against the Japanese home islands. Sources do not report from where they launched and vary as to the numbers involved, 77, 98, and 114 being claimed. Targets were Bangkok's Memorial Bridge and a major power plant. Bombs fell over 2 kilometers away, damaged no civilian structures, but destroyed some tram lines, and destroyed both the Japanese military hospital and the Japanese secret police headquarters. On the 15th of June 1944, 68 B-29s took off from bases around Chengdu. 47 B-29s bombed the Imperial Iron and Steel Works at Yavata, Fukuoka Prefecture, Japan. This was the first attack on Japanese islands since the Doolittle raid in April 1942. The first B-29 combat losses occurred during this raid, with 1 B-29 destroyed on the ground by Japanese fighters after an emergency landing in China, 1 lost to anti-aircraft fire over Yavata, and another, the Stockett's rocket, after Captain Marvin M. Stockett, aircraft commander, B-29-1 BW-42 6261, disappeared after takeoff from Chakulia, India, over the Himalayas, 12 gear, 11 crew and 1 passenger. This raid, which did little damage to the target, with only 1 bomb striking the target factory complex, nearly exhausted fuel stocks at the Chengdu B-29 bases, resulting in a slowdown of operations until the fuel stockpiles could be replenished. Starting in July, the raids against Japan from Chinese airfields continued at relatively low intensity. Japan was bombed on the 7th of July 1944, 14 B-29s. The 29th of July, 70 plus. The 10th of August, 24. The 20th of August, 61. The 8th of September, 90. The 26th of September, 83. The 25th of October, 59. The 12th of November, 29. The 21st of November, 61. The 19th of December, 36. The 6th of January, 1945, 49. B-29s were withdrawn from airfields in China by the end of January 1945. Throughout the prior period, B-29 raids were also launched from China and India against many other targets throughout Southeast Asia, including a series of raids on Singapore and Thailand. On the 2nd of November 1944, 55 B-29s raided Bangkok's Bang Siu marshalling yards in the largest raid of the war. 7 Atuf Nakajimaki 43 abusers from Phoon Bin, Air Group, 16 and 14 Ijafki 43s attempted intercept. Atuf FLT Lieutenant Thad Sakwarasap attacked a B-29, damaging it, but was shot down by return fire. 1 B-29 was lost, possibly the one damaged by FLT Lieutenant Thad Sak. On the 14th of April, 1945, a second B-29 raid on Bangkok destroyed 2 key power plants and was the last major attack conducted against Thai targets. The B-29 effort was gradually shifted to the new bases in the Mariana Islands in the Central Pacific, with the last B-29 combat mission from India flown on the 29th of March, 1945. New Mariana Islands Air Bases, edit. In addition to the logistical problems associated with operations from China, the B-29 could reach only a limited part of Japan while flying from Chinese bases. The solution to this problem was to capture the Mariana Islands, which would bring targets such as Tokyo, about 1,500 mi, 2,400 kilometers, north of the Marianas within range of B-29 attacks. The Joint Chiefs of Staff agreed in December 1943 to seize the Marianas. U.S. forces invaded Saipan on the 15th of June 1944. Despite a Japanese naval counterattack which led to the Battle of the Philippine Sea and heavy fighting on land, Saipan was secured by the 9th of July. Operations followed against Guam and Tinian, with all three islands secured by August. Naval Construction Battalions, Seabees, began at once to construct air bases suitable for the B-29, commencing even before the end of ground fighting. In all, 5 major airfields were built, 2 on the flat island of Tinian, 1 on Saipan, and 2 on Guam. Each was large enough to eventually accommodate a bomb wing consisting of 4 bomb groups, giving a total of 180 B-29s per airfield. These bases could be supplied by ship and, unlike the bases in China, were not vulnerable to attack by Japanese ground forces. The bases became the launch sites for the large B-29 raids against Japan in the final year of the war. The first B-29 arrived on Saipan on the 12th of October, 1944, and the first combat mission was launched from there on the 28th of October, 1944, with 14 B-29s attacking the Truk Atoll. The 73rd Bomb Wing launched the first mission against Japan from bases in the Marianas, on the 24th of November, 1944, sending 111 B-29s to attack Tokyo. For this first attack on the Japanese capital since the Doolittle raid in April, 1942, 73rd Bomb Wing Commander Brigadier General Emmett O'Donnell Jr. acted as mission command pilot in B-29 Dauntless Dottie. The campaign of incendiary raids started with the bombardment of Kobe on the 4th of February, 1945, then peaked early with the most destructive bombing raid in history, even when the later silver plate-flown nuclear attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki are considered, on the night of 9-10 March, 1945 on Tokyo. From then on, the raids intensified, being launched regularly until the end of the war. The attacks succeeded in devastating most large Japanese cities, with the exception of Kyoto and 4 that were reserved for nuclear attacks, and gravely damaged Japan's war industries. Although less publicly appreciated, the mining of Japanese ports and shipping routes, Operation Starvation, carried out by B-29s from April 1945 reduced Japan's ability to support its population and move its troops. The nuclear weapons, edit. The most famous B-29s were the Silver Plate series, being extensively modified to carry nuclear weapons. Early consideration was given to using the British Lancaster as a nuclear bomber, as this would require less modification. However, the superior range and high-altitude performance of the B-29 made it much a better choice, and after the B-29 began to be modified in November 1943 for carrying the atomic bomb, the suggestion for using the Lancaster never came up again. The most significant modification was the enlargement of the bomb bay, enabling each aircraft to carry either the Thin Man or Fat Man weapons. These silver plate bombers differed from other B-29s then in service by having fuel injection and reversible props. Also, to make a lighter aircraft, The silver-plate B-29s were stripped of all guns, except for those on the tail. Pilot Charles Sweeney credits the reversible props for saving Boxcar after making an emergency landing on Okinawa following the Nagasaki bombing. Enola Gay, flown by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped the first bomb, called Little Boy, on Hiroshima on the 6th of August, 1945. Enola Gay is fully restored and on display at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, outside Dulles Airport near Washington, D.C. Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles W. Sweeney, dropped the second bomb, called Fat Man, on Nagasaki 3 days later.